Master and Apprentice is Claudia Gray's fourth venture into the Star Wars universe, and to date it's the earliest story to be told in the Disney canon. To be honest, Master and Apprentice felt kind of refreshing. There's something about that pre-Episode 1 era that's just a bit lighter than the other eras, probably because it's set in a peaceful time with no galactic war, so characters aren't always moping around. The story focuses on Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi as they're sent to the planet Pijal to sign a treaty that would allow travel through a hyperspace corridor. Things go awry as different parties try to get what they want out of the treaty, including a group of terrorists known as the Opposition. They oppose the treaty because it would allow, wait for it, the Circa Corporation to remain on Pijal forever and claim all its convicted prisoners and their descendants as slaves forever, as well as a new group of terrorists called the Blackguards. It's up to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to get to the bottom of the matter and protect the Princess of Pijal from the threat while still acting in line with the Force and trying to get the treaty signed. First off, the Circa Corporation is properly back now. Apparently they've been mentioned in Aftermath, but I don't remember because I've tried to block out as much of that piece of shit as possible. According to Wikipedia, it's also mentioned in the Battlefront 2 game, and I've played the campaign and I don't remember it mentioned there at all, so either I've forgotten because it was so unimportant, or it was in the multiplayer, which I don't play. So this is the first real appearance of the Circa Corporation in the new canon, and it's nice to have a familiar name back. I liked the way Rael Averross's story unfolded. We have him in the present acting as the Lord Regent for Princess Fanry on Pijal, the princess who would be queen but quite simply isn't old enough to rule, much like Edward VI in Tudor times. But we also have his past being told through Qui-Gon's viewpoint, so it gives a nice layered approach to the storytelling, something that's very welcome when 99% of the books Disney release are nothing but linear. Apparently, Gray imagined Averross as being portrayed by actor Benjamin Bratt, who's the guy from Miss Congeniality and Catwoman. That's not really the way I imagined him in my head, to be honest, but it doesn't really do any harm. Rael was also an apprentice of Dooku, which I thought added a nice dynamic to the book, as well as acting as a plot device to let us see hints of Dooku's descent into the dark side. Rael Averross is also in Dooku Jedi Lost by Cavan Scott, but I haven't listened to it yet because I just can't concentrate on audiobooks. I like to take the time to read a book with words on pages. If other people like them, then that's fine, but I personally just can't enjoy them. There's been talk of a hardcover version of Jedi Lost due for release sometime in October since it was accidentally listed on Amazon, and I've heard mention that it might just be a script, but I think that's just someone speculating based on absolutely nothing. I really hope that isn't the case because, speaking as a fan of the Harry Potter books well before the first movie existed, nothing can let a fan of a franchise and books down more than just releasing the story as a script rather than an actual novel. I don't think it will be a script, I think it will be a novel and just hasn't been announced yet because they weren't expecting so many people to ask for it in book format, and I'd bet dollars to donuts that the author they get to write it will be Christie Golden. I don't have a negative view of Christie Golden, but if you look at her track record writing Star Wars books, she always seems to write things that have already been outlined for her. In the new canon, she wrote Dark Disciple, which is based off the scripts for the unfinished season of the Clone Wars, which no doubt will be covered when the new series airs, and she also wrote Battlefront 2 Inferno Squad, another novel that was outlined for her because it was a direct prequel to the Battlefront 2 game, and had to establish the characters and hierarchy that we would later see in the game. Then in Legends, she wrote a few books, but they were all part of a bigger story, so rather than having complete freedom to write a story of her own, she had to make sure it fit into certain guidelines because these books were part of the Legacy of the Force series and the Fate of the Jedi series. She's never written a Star Wars book that doesn't rely on scripts or pre-planned plots. She seems to be the converter or the adapter of all things Star Wars into novel format. So I would be very surprised if Dooku Jedi Lost isn't a novel and isn't written by Christie Golden. Master and Apprentice leans towards Dooku's past a lot, and there are a few similarities to Dooku Jedi Lost. I wouldn't be surprised if Disney was planning to make a Dooku movie, and if they do, I hope it covers everything from when he left the Jedi Order up to him ordering the clone army using Sifo Dyas's name. I know that was partly covered in the Clone Wars, but it would still be nice to see in a more adult movie rather than just a cartoon. I really would like to see more of Dooku's journey to the dark side, so I hope that's in Jedi Lost, or we'll get another book where it covers it so much more. There's a moment in Master and Apprentice where Obi-Wan connects to the Force during a fight for the first time, and rather than just using it to enhance his abilities, he really lets it in and enters a kind of trance state, and Qui-Gon does the same thing too. And Gray mentions how in this state there was a lot less thinking required and much more of the Force moving their arms to the right places to deflect blaster bolts back at their owners, and my fucking god, I've been waiting years for this. I've been waiting since Disney took over for them to release a book where they write the Force like this. This is exactly the way I imagined Jedi connecting to the Force and fighting in Legends. It's exactly the way it was described in books like Shadows of the Empire and the Jedi Academy trilogy. So rather than having absolute bullshit made up with absolute crap, like Luke playing with noodles and only being able to connect to the Force after a girl he fancies but barely knows dies, which actually happened in Heir to the Jedi by the way. The representation of connecting to the Force in Master and Apprentice is possibly the best thing to have happened in the book so far. It's not like I'm against everything new Disney produces, it's just that they've wiped out Legends and haven't replaced it with anything better. In fact, 100% of what they've released pales in comparison to the Legends stuff, and feels like a disconnected mess written by authors who have absolutely no understanding of the source material and haven't once opened a Legends book, let alone read one. So to have Claudia Gray write the Jedi's connection to the Force exactly as it was in Legends is something I approve of 100%, and it gets 2 thumbs way up from me. Well done. I really hope other authors will follow suit and stop trying to write brand new bullshit that just doesn't make sense just because it's either convenient to them or they don't understand the source material, and will pay more attention to the little details like this because the devil is in the details, and when small but oh so significant things like this are wrong in a book, it can really bring the book down because it just doesn't work. So well done to Claudia Gray for that, I'm really impressed. Obi-Wan likes flying ships in this, which doesn't match up with the prequels. There's an event later on in the book which explains his change in opinion on it, but it felt like a weak explanation to be honest. He ends up flying through some corridors in a ship, much like Anakin did in episode 1 at the end, and that apparently shakes him up so much he develops a dislike of flying? I know he's an apprentice at this point and not a knight, but I still think that wouldn't be enough to shake him given the fact that he's done other things that might be equally as scary, but he's fine with them. So it feels like Gray wrote him to be more exciting than he actually is, then had to find a reason to change him to what we know him as in the prequels. Qui-Gon was offered a place on the Jedi Council, which doesn't match up with when Obi-Wan said if you would just follow the code you would be on the council in The Phantom Menace. Firstly, at the end of the book, the offer to join the council still stands and Qui-Gon turns it down. So following the code clearly has nothing to do with why he's not on the council since he chose not to be on it. Secondly, it's made clear in this that Qui-Gon does follow the code, he just has a very different interpretation of it to most of the other Jedi, as well as having a different opinion of the role the Jedi should play. He feels the Jedi are seen as much more of a police force for the Senate rather than the monks they really are, and I liked this aspect because it plays right into the Qui-Gon story in Age of the Republic, and I'll be releasing that review next week so you can see what I mean. But it was nice to see stuff starting to be connected like that, rather than having stuff overwritten because Hidalgo doesn't know what he's doing, so well done to the team for that. Seriously, I don't say it often, but story group, well done. And speaking of Qui-Gon's story in Age of the Republic, the book mentions when Qui-Gon first became Dooku's apprentice, he went to the gardens in the Jedi Temple, and he could feel the dark side in plants. This plays right into Qui-Gon's story in Age of the Republic, where he seems to come across a dark side temple that looks like it was made by nature itself, so it's a good piece of connectivity there in terms of lore. I think the story group are eating their Weetabix. The other thing that happened when Qui-Gon first met Dooku was Dooku asked him how he feels, and Qui-Gon was tempted to lie but chose to tell the truth and admit he was scared, to which Dooku tells him honesty was the right answer. This parallels what happens in Dooku Jedi Lost when Dooku asks Asajj Ventress how she feels and she lies, and it's clearly the wrong answer because he shocks her with Force lightning. With this book, Qui-Gon's story in Age of the Republic and Dooku Jedi Lost, it feels like the story group, and dare I say it, Hidalgo himself, have actually got their shit together and decided to finally create a connected universe and do their jobs properly. After years of them absolutely taking the piss and me complaining about it, it's a nice change. To be honest, I can't really believe it's happened, but I approve. Obi-Wan had a nice little reference to the prequels as well when he shows Princess Fanfrey the inner workings of his lightsaber and tells her the weapon is a Jedi's life. I didn't understand two things in this book. The first is when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan attack a military compound and they jump right into the middle of a group of terrorists, start fighting, and Qui-Gon realises that they're wearing energy shields that encompass their entire bodies, and that stops the Jedi's lightsabers from hurting them. That's all well and good, even if it's a bit silly since that kind of technology exists. Why does nobody else use it after this book? I mean, they had to recreate it in Thrawn Alliances. Makes no sense to me. But on the same page, Qui-Gon decides if he can't attack them himself, he has to use their own firepower against them and deflects their laser blasts back at them, which works for some reason. This makes no sense to me. How can their shields work against lightsabers but not against blaster bolts? It seemed lazy and it was never explained, and I thought that should have been addressed rather than glossed over because it literally doesn't add up. The second is that the ultimate bad guy turns out to be Princess Fanfrey herself, which makes absolutely no sense to me. She takes up arms against pretty much everyone because she doesn't like the way Zerka are planning to treat her people, and I just don't get why she had to create her own private army when all she had to do was not sign the treaty. After all, Zerka would have only had power if she signed, so if she didn't sign, she would have got exactly what she wanted, but without any bloodshed. This, of course, creates a massive plot hole in the book and removes the drive for most of the key players, so I wasn't impressed that I could see through this paper-thin plot so easily, but fortunately the interactions between the Jedi and the history of them still make the book worth reading, but I wasn't impressed with these plot issues. We get to see the prophecy of the Chosen One in full, and for those of you who watch my reviews so you don't have to read the books like the disgruntled Jedi, hello mate, here's the prophecy in full. Only through sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the Nameless. The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the entire galaxy. When the Force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. A chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance in the Force be restored. There's another prophecy later on that is revealed as Dooku in the past is going way too far with his research into the prophecies. At one point he uses Force lightning on an enemy to save young Qui-Gon's life, in spite of the fact that he's still part of the Jedi Order, and it shows just how much he'd really turned before he even left the Order. The prophecy he was focusing on though goes like this: "He who learns to conquer death will through his greatest student live again." Now, given the fact that Master and Apprentice was released about 7 months before the release of Rise of Skywalker, I think most people would be jumping up and down about how this links to the Emperor returning in Episode 9. Combine that with what Qui-Gon says about balance meaning equal parts dark and light, something I don't recall ever being acknowledged before when it comes to the prophecy, and I personally think it's a red herring, because it just won't have anything to do with Rise of Skywalker. I also don't believe the Emperor will be returning the way people seem to think, and I know I'm in the minority on that, but we'll see. That laugh in the trailer was taken from Return of the Jedi. I believe if the Emperor is in episode 9, it will be in the past. It will be recordings of him doing an experiment or something like that. Perhaps he created Rey as a clone from Anakin, and there would be holo recordings of him planning or doing the experiment that created her. I don't believe JJ would be stupid enough to bring the Emperor back for real. And while I'm talking about 9, I may as well add that there's a lot of talk about retconning The Last Jedi. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think JJ will do his own thing and try to do stuff that isn't really affected by the events of episode 8, but if he does have to reference events from it, he will. He won't retcon them. For instance, Luke will be in it, but he'll be a Force ghost, just like Ben was in Empire Strikes Back. He won't retcon 8 because he'll want to try to keep everything cohesive as much as he can. I mean, I know it's too late for all of that now, and I could be wrong about both things, but that's what my money's on. Ringo Vinder makes an appearance, and that's twice in a very short amount of time. It first appeared in the Clone Wars episodes in Season 6 when the clone troopers started to suffer the effects of the psychological programming and they had to be taken to Kamino. Then it wasn't in anything at all, and the next time it was mentioned was in the Tarkin story from the Age of Rebellion series. So it went years without being mentioned, then it's in 2 books in as many months, and I wonder if it will feature in episode 9, or at least the books that will build up to it. Being mentioned in 2 stories isn't as big a giveaway that something will be in episode 9 as opening a theme park based on a location that's only been in 1 novel, but it does make me curious. Claudia Gray has once again done something that she seems to do in every fucking book, and it does my head in every fucking time. For some reason, she feels the need to randomly put entire paragraphs in brackets. I think I mentioned it in my review of Lost Stars, and I'll say it again. If you have something to say that takes up an entire paragraph, it doesn't belong in brackets. I'm not talking about a 1-line paragraph, I'm talking about 5 lines. A proper paragraph in brackets. I really wish she would stop doing this because it makes absolutely no sense why she does it. She doesn't do it too often, but when it appears in every book she writes, it can get annoying. For some reason, the new Star Wars authors just refuse to give descriptions of aliens, and I find that disappointing and it kind of irritates me. When the format of the story is words on a page, why not describe the aliens since we don't have any visual aids? They used to in Legends. It's a big part of how a lot of people learn the names of different species in the galaxy, so why not do it in the new canon? Do they assume we know all the names of every species? If so, that's a silly assumption to make given how many there are and the fact that most of the time in the movies and in the TV shows, species aren't really called out by their name because we can see them. We can't see them in a book, which is why it's so important that authors use their words to describe the aliens and not just use the species name. And I feel like I'm missing out when she names characters on the council and doesn't describe them because I have no idea who's talking. Claudia Gray isn't alone in this. Most of the authors in the new canon do it these days, but in Master and Apprentice, an example of this would be her describing the character Nymphiana, Rael's apprentice, as Telothian, whatever the fuck that is, with no other description. I have no idea what a fucking Telothian is, and Claudia Gray didn't see fit to describe it, so I had to Google it. It turns out a Telothian is the same species as Adi Gallia, the woman from the Jedi Council who has the tendrils hanging down her head. I shouldn't have to Google a species, they should be described in the book. The description could just be a single sentence, but it needs to be something so we can imagine what's going on and visualise the aliens. Gray also keeps using the catchphrase, "by the Force," in her books, like she's hoping it will catch on, but it won't because it's so annoying. It's as bad as "by the minions of Zendor" in the Han Solo trilogy. It's not a good catchphrase in this case because the Jedi aren't prone to shouting things out when they're surprised. They're calm, collected people who take things in their stride, so making them spout shit like that is just stupid and annoying. At this point, I'll just add that I'm not looking forward to the next book, which is Alphabet Squadron. It's by Alexander Freed, who also wrote Twilight Company, which overall I thought was okay, but my lack of excitement for the book comes from the fact that it's set after Return of the Jedi, which lumps it firmly in with books like the Aftermath trilogy and Last Shot, which means chances are it's probably not going to be a good Star Wars book, and instead it will be a book designed to push social justice warrior politics, gay people, bisexual people, non-binary people, things that can't get pregnant like droids getting pregnant. Maybe it won't, but given that 4 out of 4 books that take place after Return of the Jedi have this bullshit forced in them left, right and centre, I'll be pleasantly shocked if it doesn't. So overall, I enjoyed Master and Apprentice. I think it had a few issues, but nothing that will wreck the book for most people, even me, and given that this is a Disney book, that's a fucking miracle. But then again, Claudia Gray's showings in Star Wars have never really had major continuity errors like most of the other books and comics, so it's nice to say the same here. The book definitely feels fresh because of when it's set, and that's fantastic, but I do have the concern of how long can it last. I don't think it's a sustainable thing, and I have no doubt that when they start bringing in their social justice warrior authors to start writing in this era, it will ruin it just like they've ruined the other eras. But we shall see. I think Master and Apprentice was good if you can look past the plot holes. While that did bring the book down, the character development was excellent and did kind of make up for it. It had a good amount of world building and lore, the characters were mostly written well, it had a decent story if you can get past that princess fan-free thing. It's the first book in the new canon that shows the Jedi connecting to the Force the way I've always considered them to, and not the way shit authors like Kevin Hearn did in Heir to the Jedi. And in the acknowledgements it says they actually had someone proofread it before it went to print, something I've been complaining about for 2 fucking years. So yes, Master and Apprentice is a good book even if it does have a few flaws. It's definitely a step in the right direction, and I look forward to seeing more books of this calibre being released in the Star Wars universe, but I would like to see them have excellent character development and a plot that doesn't have holes.